or let's wait just a second. Got it. Okay, so which means, or just say we can't tell which models is more reliable than the other when we extrapolate into the region that is not experimentally known. And being an experimentalist, we have to continuously provide experimental measurement so that to better constrain or benchmark those nuclear theories. In principle, measurements on any nucleus on nuclear chart will be useful to benchmark theories. However, across the entire nuclear chart, there are few, not so many, but few nuclei that are more foundational to nuclear theories. And they are experimentally accessible, but also sufficiently neutron-rich to represent the properties of those extremely short-lived nuclei. And more importantly, they should have simple structure like the nuclei near the shell closure to have a stronger link with nuclear theories. And here we would like to propose that indium-133 is one of such special case. This nucleus has 49 protons and 84 neutrons. And this large neutron to proton ratios can open up a large variety of beta decay channels that are only available in very neutron-rich nuclei. And therefore, it is a perfect beta decay demonstrator for the R-process nuclei. And at the same time, the proximity of indium-133 to the doubly magic tin-132 can substantially reduce nuclear-nuclear correlations in both indium-133 and its beta decay daughter tin-133 to make this a unique decay system with minimum complexity. And with this, we can compare with nuclear theories in very deep level, which I will come back in a few slides in my discussion. And in this page, I want to show you what is the microscopic picture behind indium-133 beta decay. And this is really related how the neutron and proton occupy different orbitals. Since there are 84 neutrons, so the valence neutrons start filling F7.5 orbital beyond 82 shell closure. On the other side, the last proton will occupy the G9.5 orbitals below the Z equals 50 shell gap with one proton hole on this orbital. So there should be a favored gamma of Taylor transitions between G7.5 neutrons into G9.5 protons. And other gamma of Taylor transitions, for instance, from G7.5 neutron to G7.5 protons, this transition have to include proton excitation across the 50 shell gap, which require much larger excitation energy. And the same for those type of transition. Therefore, they are much less competitive compared with this transition feeding the G9.5 orbital below the shell gap. So therefore, this G7.5 to G9.5 transition is a single dominant transition in beta decay of indium-133. And regarding the first forbidden transitions, from the name, it already suggests that this transition has extremely small matrix elements or the small overlap between the initial and the final wave functions. However, what is unique in indium-133 or other neutron-rich nuclei is this extremely large neutron to proton ratio place this valence neutron and proton into different harmonic oscillator shell. And so the neutron and proton orbitals near the Fermi surfaces actually have opposite parity, which can be connected directly by the first forbidden transitions. And what happens in this decay of indium-133 is the first forbidden transition can populate lower line states with larger transition energy compared with gamma of Taylor transition. And if we recall the Fermi golden rule, the decay rate is determined by both the matrix elements, but also the phase space factor, which is a strong scaling factor approximate to the fifth power of the transition energy. And this scaling factor can really allow the first forbidden transition to compete with gamma of Taylor transition in the beta decay of indium-133. Therefore, we need to study both gamma of Taylor and first forbidden transition to have a full picture to understand how indium-133 beta decay. Even though this is an important decay system to study and also should be very simple, however, the experimental knowledge we have learned from this system is far less than what you expected. And here I just summarize some experiment starting spectroscopy information in T133, which is beta-decay daughter of indium-133. Because due to these experimental techniques, most of the state we have observed so far in T133 are mostly below the neutron separation energy at 2.4 MeV. For instance, following the beta decay of indium-134, the excited states in T133 were first observed at ISOLDE in 1996, and then our colleagues at Oak Ridge National Lab confirmed the excitation energy of those states, but also, more importantly, they pinned down the configuration of those states. And it reveals that those states were given by the neutron single particle orbitals beyond 82 shell closure. Beyond the neutron separation energy, on the other hand, so far there are only two states that has been observed. Right above the separation energy, there is a 13.5 plus state, which comes from I13.5, which have been very recently observed by our colleagues at ISOLDE. And also there is an 11.5 minor state at 3.56 MeV, which has been observed by several different experiments in the past. And I hope, excuse me? Sorry, is there any question or? Okay, I will just proceed. So this is the knowledge. Beyond these two states, we don't have many more information about this nucleus. However, according to the previous experiment, it has been measured that almost 90% of indium-133 beta decay is followed by neutron emissions, which tells us the major decay strengths from indium-133 actually go beyond the neutron separation energy in indium-133. And the states that took those decay strengths have not been measured yet, have not been observed in T133 yet. And this leads to the primary goal of this particular experimental work. So we want to measure the decay, the major decay channels from this simple nucleus indium-133, and more specifically, we want to measure the excitation energy of the Gamow-Taylor states in T133 and measure the Gamow-Taylor matrix elements from the G7.5 to G9.5. And this will tell us where the neutron orbital, the G7.5 is relative to the Fermi surface or relative to the shell gap. And also we want to address other neutron orbitals between 50 and 82 shells in T133 and measure the first forbidden transition strength populating the corresponding state. And here I want to emphasize that the transition here we want to measure in indium-133 are not excuse me? Okay, so those transitions are not exclusive for indium-133. In fact, all of them are general and fundamental transitions for the whole area of neutron-rich nuclei in the southeast of T132. So measuring this single nucleus can give us a full picture on how beta decay takes place in this exotic region, which have strong impact to the R process, because this is really the region where the neutron capture in our process cannot go further to the right because neutron separation energy is too low to hold neutron long enough for further neutron capture. So here, beta decay have to come in and shift the nuclear synthesis path to the higher Z regions. And therefore, measuring the strength in indium-133 will really help us to quantify how fast the R process can go through the N=82 shell closure, which is one of the few bottlenecks along the R process path. And so this experiment was performed at ISOLDE. So here I just give an overview, some information about this experiment. So we use this high energy 1.4 GeV proton beam to produce this radioactive isotope in uranium carbide target with fusion fragmentations. It's very high proton beam. And after that, we use this resonance ionization laser ion source to ionize this indium isotope of interest, and then they were separated by this the general purpose separator to select mass number 133 before they were delivered to the decay station, which is located here. And at the decay station, we have this tape system. So the beam were implanted to our end tape, which can be moved to remove these long-lived activities, so to have a kind of a clean decay spectrum. And one of the main features of this experiment is actually this laser ion source at ISOLDE, because this nucleus we want to study, this indium-133, have two beta-decay states. It's ground, the 9½ plus ground state, and also 1½ minus isomer. And they all have quite similar half-life, which become very hard to separate in a traditional decay experiment. The good news for us is those two states have extremely different hyperfine structure, which means they can be ionized by using laser at different frequency. By doing this, it means that with this powerful laser ion source, we can selectively ionize one state from the two and deliver this pure beam to our decay station, which is extremely beneficial in our data analysis because we can extract these reliable beta decay branching ratios from individual states because those two states are separated. And you can notice these two states have extremely large spin gap. It's 9½ and 1/2. Also, the parity are different, which means they will populate completely different state in daughter in T133. And combining beta decay selection rule and laser ionization, we can actually perform spin parity assignment to a few states, which is extremely valuable for our discussion. And here, this is page I show you the experimental setup or detector setup at decay stations. And so the beam comes from this direction, will be implanted into a tape inside our decay chamber. And in the upstream, we have 4 Clover detectors, this high purity germanium detectors to measure this beta delay gamma rays. And downstream, we have 26 neutron detectors, which made of plastic scintillators to measure time of flight at 1 meter flat path. Excuse me. This is a neutron time of flight measurement. So the start signal is given by plastic scintillators inside the decay chamber. And of course, the stop signal is given by those neutron detectors. So this is a very, the setup, the system with very good detection efficiency for instance, beta particles, gamma rays, and neutrons. And another main feature of this experiment is that we have, so the data acquisition is fully digital. So we take, so the signal from beta and neutron detectors were fully digitized by this 250 megahertz sample frequency. And by perform offline trace analysis, we can achieve sub-nanosecond time resolution, much better than the sample frequency, which is extremely important for the time of flight measurement. And before I go to the real the result from indium-133, I just want to briefly introduce how do we characterize our neutron detectors, because this is a time of flight measurement. And so to do this, we use the beta decay from potassium-49 and nitrogen-17 measured at ISOLDE using exactly identical setup. And these two isotopes have fully characterized beta-delayed neutron emission peaks from literature. And the task is to fit this experimental spectrum using the so-called response function. And to construct the response function, we start from monoenergetic neutrons in Geant4, these Monte Carlo simulations. And here I'm showing you an example for 1 MeV neutrons in our neutron detectors in the simulations. So it consists of this main peak, fast peak, but then with this exponential tail from the scattered neutrons, then the neutrons scatter from the environment. And after that, we convolute this the neutron response function from previous step with internal line width of the states. If the states have a significant broadening like wider than the energy resolution of our detectors. And after that, we use the response function such constructed to fit the online calibration data as shown here. And in fact, we can achieve really good agreement between the experimental spectrum and our response function by only using the neutron peaks reported by literature. And until this step, we are confident that we fully characterize our detectors, and we are ready to move forward and to analyze the real data, which is more exciting. And so here I'm showing you the first neutron time of flight spectrum taken in coincidence with indium-133 beta-decay. So each peak in this spectrum corresponds to a neutron-unbound state in indium-132, which were populated by the beta-decay of indium-133, either by the ground state or isomer. And the neutron emission from, this neutron emission from those states in indium-133 will populate the low-lying state in indium-132. And here, just before I go into any details, I just want to make it clear that when we measure the ground state, the beam is extremely pure, consisting of the ground state beam. Now, like even if it's not 900%, the contamination from isomer is really negligible. We can't see anything from the isomer. However, when we switch to isomer, the indium-133 at the ground state were also ionized and delivered to our decay station. And that is the reason that you see all the neutron peak from ground state appear in the isomer spectrum. And this we have to take into account in our data analysis. And the main work of our analysis is to fit those neutron spectrum and using the response function I just showed you in the last slide. And from the fitting analysis, we can get neutron kinetic energies, which further translate into the excitation energy of the state in indium-133, and also the intensity of the peak correspond to the beta-decay branching ratios or fitting probability, apparent beta-decay fitting to that particular state. And another thing I want to emphasize is all of the main peaks you see in this spectrum are single transition. They are not detected in coincidence with any other neutron peak or gamma decays in indium-132, which means those neutron emissions are from a state from indium-133 and go directly to the ground state of indium-132. And this result is not surprising because if we look at the structure of indium-132, the first excited state, the 2+, is at extremely high energy. It's over 4 MeV above the ground state. And most of the neutron-unbound state we populate in indium-133 actually don't have sufficient energy to go to the first excited state. So they can only go to the ground state. And this also make those neutron spectrum very clean and very isolated neutron peaks, because those neutron peaks were really, the neutron stress is really concentrated between one initial state and one final state. There is no fragmentation go to multiple final states, which will make the data analysis actually much more complicated. So here we can, because of this simplicity, we can extract the beta-decay branching or the beta-decay strength distribution very precisely up to high end, like a few MeV above neutron separation energy, without worrying about this pandemonium effect, which can be as issues for this when we want to get this kind of things from very exotic nuclei. And now I would like to link this spectrum to a simple picture, like the single part picture, to have an intuitive understanding like what we are seeing in this neutron time of flight spectrum. And so before our measurement, before our experiments, as I introduced in the introduction, there is already this 11.5 minor state that have been already observed by several other previous experiments, including gamma ray spectroscopy. So then the excitation energy we measured, we extract from our time of flight measurement is in perfect agreement with the literature value, which also verified our data analysis. And so this state, this state we can see it also in the ground state decay of indium-133, and this state can be understood by the population of this state can be understood by transforming a neutrons from its H11 to a proton on the G9, which is first forbidden transitions. And during this this transition, there are two neutron particles above the 82 shell closure, which behave as the spectators. So they don't interact. They just couple to a pair with spin 0 throughout the decay. Therefore, the spin parity of this state is given by the orbital occupied by the neutron hole. And this is the ground state decay. And following the isomer decay, we actually see two completely new states. It's like, and the reason is in the isomer of indium-133, and the proton hole in the initial state is not on the P1, it's not on the G9 orbital, but it's on the P1 half. And so the G9 is fully occupied, so the H11 to G9 is blocked, is not allowed in the isomer decay. Instead, there is new beta decay, there's new decay channels from the neutron on either D3 or S1 to go to a proton on P1 half. And both are first forbidden transitions. And here we just follow using this systematics from the less neutron-rich tin isotope. And so we assign the lower state to be 3½ plus, given by this D3 and the higher state to be 1½ plus, given by the S1 half. So here, using this excitation energy and branching ratios, what we can do is to extract the so-called log FD, the comparative half-life. And here, the results, and all those three transitions have log FD between 5.5 and 6, which consistent with our anticipation that all those three states will populate in the first forbidden transitions. And now I would like to move up to this higher excitation energy and focus on this strongest peak we see in the ground state decay. So this is the peak exclusive in the ground state decay, and this corresponds to a state at 5.9 MeV. And this is a really strong peak that takes 40% intensity of the neutron branch, which translates to a log FD of 4.7. So this is reasonable. So this, because of this strong intensity, we assign this state to be the Gumpf-Teller state we are looking for in G133. So this will be a 7½ plus state, which is given by transforming neutron from G7½ to proton G9². And again, because of this state have kind of similar structure compared with this other three states at low energy, in the sense that there are always two neutron particles above the 82 shell gap and one neutron hole below it. So I will call this 7½ plus state and other three states this neutron two particle one hole state in the following discussion. And another major group of decay we can observe in this case is the transforming a new proton above the 82 shell closure and into a proton above the Z=50 shell gap. And the final state will have, instead of have neutron particle hole excitation, we will have proton one particle one hole configurations in T133. And in our experiments, we observe such kind of states in this time of flight region, which is around 5 MeV excitation energy. And again, the log FT values we extracted are consistent with, because also those can only be populated by first forbidden transition. So, and they agree with the log FT value we extracted. And also another thing is like this excitation energy actually agree with the previous measurement starting the indium-132 beta decay, which also populate this kind of proton particle hole excited state in T132 around 5 MeV. And using this information we learned from this experiment, we can substantially extend our knowledge in T133, especially beyond the neutron separation energy. And here, I just want to highlight the similarity between the neutron two particle one hole state we just newly constructed and the neutron zero particle one hole state in T131, because those states actually have, all of them have a single neutrons below the n equal 82 shell closure. The difference here in T133 is there are two extra neutrons above n equal 82 shell gap, and therefore they have this particle hole nature for this group, which will shift the excitation energy of the entire group upward by this amount of energy, which is closely related to the neutron shell gap at n equal 82. And this is the full decay scheme we constructed from this work. And you can really see how strong this gamma of Taylor decay. Also, just want to make it clear that different color correspond to different states, a decay from different initial state. The blue is ground state and red is isomer. So this gamma of Taylor state, the gamma of Taylor strength is really strong compared with the first forbidden transition to lower excitation energy. And here, I just show you the decay strength is plotted in linear scale, where you can only see a few of the strongest transitions. But if you plot the same things in log scale, you will notice there are a few more states which have much weaker branching ratios, which we believe come from the higher order coupling between neutron particle and holes. And here, I just want to do a very simple practice, just like people use Weisskopf unit to benchmark electromagnetic transition like B of E2 to see if the state is a single particle-like or collective-like. So here we use the gamma of Taylor state, and we want to compare with the single particle estimate of this gamma of Taylor matrix element. From experiment, we start from this log FT 4.7, which can get this BGT around 0.12. And this, regarding the single particle estimate, there are a few formula we can follow easily. So here we just take the textbook from a Suhonen, and which give the single particle gamma of Taylor matrix element from a pure G7.5 to proton G9.5 equals 2.87 without any quenching. Of course, we know that we cannot compare row gamma of Taylor operators because in the nucleus, because there is in medium effect which always quench the observed gamma of Taylor strength. The problem here, however, is that we need a really strong quenching factor as 0.2 to match the experimental data, the experimental observation. And the nominal value, like the standard value people often use, is around 0.7, 0.6, depending on the model, like calculations. And this really suggests that the single particle picture, so the state we observe is not a single particle state. And the single particle estimate is just too simple to be realistic to reproduce this strength, the gamma of Taylor strength in a quantitative way. And therefore, we want to move forward, a step forward. So we want to understand, to get some more insight about what we have measured regarding the excitation energy and the decay strength. So we perform this shell model calculations to start the indium 133 beta decay. The challenge here is that, so in my previous, like in the past 30 minutes of my talk, I was talking about neutron and proton particle hole excitations across T132, which means we cannot assume, so which means that most of the interaction that are available on the market cannot be used because they always assume T132 is inactive, is perfect doubly magic core, and we have to break it to start in the states we are interested. Therefore, we decide to construct new interactions based on the strontium 88 core, and then include 6 neutron and 6 proton orbitals outside this core. And here I just use different color, show the orbitals inside and outside T132. So you can really see that we have to include quite a few orbitals outside T132, and in order to calculate corresponding decay path. And you may also notice that we have to sacrifice a lot of these neutron orbitals beyond 82 shell closure. Like we can, so far we only include the first level, which is F7.5, and ignore all this high line state orbital like H9.5 or F5.5, P3.5, P1.5. And indeed, those orbitals may have some contribution to the beta decay, but they're only populate lower line state, like the neutron bound state in T133. And from our measurement, we know that those strength is not a major contributor to the beta decay of T133. And the strength going to neutron-unbound state is much stronger. And therefore, just in a practical way, like to make this calculation feasible with our computation power, we decide to ignore those orbitals at this moment. And so regarding the single particle energy for those orbitals, we just use the available experimental data around T132 and to reproduce the single particle energy for those in the nucleus, such as T131 and T133 and so on. And regarding the two-body interactions, so the two-body matrix elements, we have a few different options regarding different nuclear potential. And so here we have three different options. We have this N3LO and argon V18, and those two interactions were derived using the many-body perturbation theory, the toolkit developed by Morten Jensen. And also we include this monopole-based universal interaction, which was developed or proposed by the Tokyo group by Professor Otsuka. And this page here, this is the comparisons of the shell model calculation and experimental data. And in this particular plot, I just focus on the 4 neutrons, 2 particle, 1 hole state. Therefore, I use 4 different colors to differentiate different states. And the square is always the experimental data, and this marker are the shell model calculation using different the nuclear potentials. So the gamma of tether and the first forbidden. So the horizontal axis is excitation energy, and the vertical is the so-called decay strength, which is defined as 1/Ft, which is same for both gamma of tether and for forbidden transitions. Those transition strengths were calculated using the shell model wave function diagonalized by the K-shell program. And regarding this quenching factor, yes, we need to use quenching factors to calculate those data, but those quenching factors were just taken from previous work. It's like we don't introduce any new quenching factors. Those are just the number that have been used by the previous shell model calculations. And now I just want to analyze this step by step. So first we focus on the lower energy, so the lower states populated by the first forbidden transitions. And it turns out that all these different interactions or nuclear potentials predict kind of consistent pictures for those first forbidden transitions. And so they have very good agreement with experimental data with both excitation energy and the decay strength. And the picture given by those different potentials really like those particular configurations with 2 neutrons above 82 and 1 neutron hole particular orbital have the strongest contribution in the wave functions. Like they contribute more than 80% in the wave functions. So are really dominant in those states at excitation energy above around 3.5 MeV. But when we move up to higher excitation energy and try to study this gamma of tether state, and different interactions, different shell model calculations start to diverge, actually significantly. What we notice here is that for instance, the calculations from BMU produce this gamma of tether strength like factor of 6 stronger than the same calculation predicted by N3LO. And also they have very different, and this difference is really reflected by different the configuration of the wave functions. And in the wave function from the VMU, this particular configurations is 1 neutron hole on G7.5 is really dominant in the state. It's similar to the first, like those lower line states. this configuration can take up to 80% in total wave function. Well, in the N3LO, this state is extremely mixed. This computator state, like even though this configuration is still the leading order term, but the contribution is less than 50%. So it's 50% versus 85%. And this will make this computator strength so different. And our experimental data actually favor this prediction from N3LO, saying this state is rather, it's a mixing state. It's not a pure, like, just configuration anymore. And just want to let you know that this calculation from VMU is actually very close to the single particle estimate I showed you a couple of slides back, which also means that they're consistent, that if you have a single particle, very pure configuration, you will get this computator strength overestimate compared with the experimental data. And now I want to show this. So before I would just show you the comparison for 4 specific states, but now I want to combine everything and show you the cumulative beta decay, beta strength distributions between experiment and theory. And here, the blue is ground state decay, and the red is from isomer. The solid line with this shadow is the experimental data with uncertainty. Okay, and the dashed line is the shell model calculation using N3LO, because this interaction seems to give the best prediction regarding the computator strength. And what you can see in this comparison is that at low energy, relatively low excitation energy, what you're seeing is small strengths adding together, which come from this first forbidden transitions, but until 6 MeV. At 6 MeV, there is such a sudden jump in the ground state decay, which is given by this particular matrix element from G7.5 to from G7.5 neutron to G9.5 protons. And beyond the 6 MeV, actually, the accumulated strength distribution just increased steadily and from experiment, but in which also kind of catch by our calculation at around up to around 8 to 9 MeV, because beyond this 9 MeV, we start to see some kind of very sharp increase in the calculated strength distribution. And here we find that this very strong the strength is given by the Gumbel-Taylor transition from a neutron between 50 and 82 shell into a proton between 50 and 82 shell. And this is actually the tail from giant Gumbel-Taylor resonance inside this Q beta window. And this discrepancy, so generally speaking, our model can predict pretty well until very high energy, but this discrepancy at this high energy might be there. We think there will be a lot of reasons, but one of the very likely reason is due to our truncations in our calculations. I didn't explain this explicitly, but since we have a lot of neutron and proton single particle orbitals in our calculations, we have to constrain how many particles can be excited across the TIM-132 core. Because if we have no limitation, they will easily explode our dimensions, the computation dimension. And so in this particular calculation, we limit up to 2-particle, 2-hole excitation across TIM-132, which is, I think, is good enough for the lower excited states, but maybe not sufficient to reproduce these nuclear correlations or the strength distribution at such high excitation energy. But nevertheless, I think the model did a pretty good job to catch more the major behavior of this decay strength. But the goal in the future, of course, is to develop a proper interaction and model space for the shell model calculation to describe the beta decay properties in this region, because as I introduced, this is the region where the decay properties have a strong impact on the R process. So a reliable shell model calculation will be really appreciated. So lastly, I want to go back to the global calculations, which I discussed in my discussion, in my introduction. And so here I'm using, again, the plot I show you at the first second slide of my talk, but here we can add more experimental information into this plot. And more specifically, since we can identify gamma of Taylor and first forbidden transitions from indium-133 beta decay, we can extract the partial half-life experimentally and compare with different global models. And here, we can add this red and black experimental data from using our new result. And with this new additional information, we can really tell like which model is better or the other. But more importantly, we can address the origin of those discrepancy in each model. For instance, the discrepancy from Peter Moore calculation is really by this too fast allowed gamma of Taylor transition. Well, in the Marquette's calculations, the first forbidden transition is the rate is overestimated. The calculation from Evan May have a reasonable the ratio between gamma of Taylor and first forbidden transition, but unfortunately, its absolute rate is underestimated. And overall, I think the Bozov 16, the calculation by even Bozov have the best agreement with our experimental data. And also we have our own QRPA calculation by Sariguren. And also, but unfortunately, we can only consider allowed gamma of Taylor transition, but it shows a good agreement with our data. So the conclusion I want to have from this comparison is that even for this simple nucleus, this indium-133, which is actually not too far away from the stability line, it is still not trivial to predict properly the partial half-life or the competition between gamma of Taylor and the first forbidden transitions, and also the absolute rate from this two decay mode. And it's really important to understand this nucleus before we can extrapolate it further into more neutron-rich case, because if this is really the first step to test our models before we can have a reliable prediction for something it's completely unknown. And so this is the last slide about the work of indium-133. But before I conclude my talk, I would like to just briefly mention that since you can see from this talk that these neutron detectors, neutron time of flight measurement can be extremely powerful techniques to study this interesting physics far from the stability line, like really go close to the neutron rich is neutron-drip line. So therefore, in the last few years, we didn't let those detectors rest in peace. So instead we carried those detectors around the world and to measure this decay properties in different facilities. For instance, in 2018, we took over the neutron detectors to RIBF at RIKEN to study neutron spectroscopy around Nickel 78. And last year, in 2020, we also have our experiment at NSCL MSU to study the decay properties around the so-called island of inversion. And we have already took a lot of good data with these neutron detectors, which really show you that those detectors can provide good, can work very well, not only at ISO facility, but also in flight fragmentation facilities. Of course, this requires the development of implantation detector, which has been one of the main focus of our group at UT. And this development will certainly be beneficial for the future experiment at AFRIC decay station. And of course, we have a lot, also many other experiments that has been accepted at ISOLDE or AFRIC decay station. So there will be certainly more exciting experiment coming soon. So please stay tuned. And now to summarize, I think I already have spent a lot of time. So this is a summary of my talk. And I would like to thank my colleagues, especially Miguel Madurga and Robert Grzywacz, my supervisor at UT, who really initiate this project at ISOLDE. And really thank for all the effort from my colleagues. And also I would like to thank for your attention, and any questions are welcome.
Any questions for our speaker? Just unmute yourself and go ahead and talk, please. It was a very interesting talk.
Thank you.
I was just wondering about how complicated it would be to go much further than this. It was either higher in excitation energy or
You mean experimentally or
yeah, experimentally. Yeah.
And, well, it's I think the main issue is this production rate. It's but so this is our plans. Like we are trying to extend this measurement along the indium isotopic chain. So for instance, we want to go to indium 134 and 135 at ISOLDE. And so the major limitation, I think, is like when you go to more neutron-rich isotope, the production rate drops just very fast.
There's
And
also, excuse me, there's also a question in the chat. And the question is, did the shell model calculations include three-body forces?
At this moment, no. So, okay, so I would really say that this shell model calculations is something like we just want to try something and to see if it does explain the experimental data or not. So it's like really like this is really only the starting point to show that maybe it worth to following this kind of direction in the future. So this is not really some kind of finalized shell model calculation. It's just a trial so that we see if something works, something doesn't work, and then we can have this kind of things like for the future, like more extensive theoretical work.
Any other questions for our speaker?
Hi, this is Jutta Escher. I have a follow-on question to the one from Oliver. You've talked about the shell model calculations,
yes,
and you talked about different interactions, and you talked about the model space. So can you make an assessment of what the next step should be? Increase the model space or look for a better interaction? What would be the first step?
There will be a lot of things, I think, theoretically. And as I said, because our limitation, right? So we have to do a lot of truncations, like in these theories, in these calculations. And really that this is not a full picture. As I said, we have to remove some of the neutron particles, orbitals. And also another thing, which I think is very important, is that what will be the proper this residual interaction? So like here we use this. Let me try to find. Okay, so we use this many-body perturbation theory, but we know that when we try to extract like this residual interaction from multiple major shells, there is more proper way to do it. So like to use this. I don't know the theoretical term, but there is like this algorithm to derive this interaction between multiple major shells. And for this, this is just like the things like we try and to see if this simple interactions can catch some of the main physics, or if this can explain the data. But another thing I think we worth to develop is yes, it's really to release the constraint on the particle Hall excitation cross T132, because this calculation is not really converged. It's like if we start adding more configuration space, it's probably we still see a large gaining in binding energy or something like that. So which is, I would say, it's like this is probably the direction for futures.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. This concludes our seminar for today.
Thank you.